Welcome to the Wealth Dialogue. I'm Emily.
And I'm Jack.
Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tearing into a stack of notes all about personal finance, specifically the budgeting rules that people only seem to figure out after years of stress and confusion. And sometimes, a significant amount of debt. We all have this image of budgeting as this like painful chore, right? A restriction where you have to say no to everything fun. But what we found in this material suggests that perspective is, well, it's a whole problem. The core issue isn't really a lack of discipline. It's that nobody teaches us the right rules early on. We're taught restriction, not structure. So our mission today is to give you a genuine shortcut. We're going to extract the mindset shifts and the specific actionable rules that can actually make your financial life easier. We want to get you from that feeling of anxiety to, a sense of calm.
Exactly. And to get to that clarity, we have to start by tackling that mental barrier. We synthesized all this material into two main parts for you. First, we're going to look at the common misconceptions that sabotage us, the mindset shifts. And then second, we'll get into the 6 specific practical rules that act as your toolkit for building a system that actually works in the real world.
Okay, so let's unpack that foundational shift right now, because I think it's the reason people, they viscerally hate budgeting. They think it means deprivation. If it's not punishment, what is it?
It's direction.
Yeah.
That's the core of it. Budgeting is about giving every single dollar a job before you spend it. When you feel deprived, it's usually because you didn't proactively give your fun money a job, so now you're scrambling to cover the essentials. If your budget feels like this restrictive wall, you're naturally going to rebel against it. You lose that sense of autonomy.
And that loss of autonomy is exactly why people fall off the wagon so fast. We're not trying to tell you to use less money. We're showing you how to feel completely confident about the money you're spending. If you open your budget app and your stomach just drops, you are using restriction as your guide. This deep dive is about swapping that for intentional direction, for calm, not guilt.
That is the essential shift. If you have that directional clarity, even looking at negative numbers feels manageable because you can make a plan. Without it, negative numbers feel like a moral failure.
So let's get into the mechanics of why people fail, even with the best intentions. Someone starts strong, January 1st, and then by March, they've completely quit. We found 4 huge failure points that are surprisingly consistent.
The first one, and this is probably the most common, is setting completely unrealistic expectations.
The perfect month budget.
Exactly. People plan for a perfect month. They allocate $0 for impulse buys, 0 for that unexpected dinner with friends, and 0 for that moment you forget your lunch and have to, buy something.
Which is just not real life. I mean, it doesn't exist. So when that unplanned $50 birthday present comes up, the budget is instantly blown.
Right, and then the person concludes, I'm bad with money, budgeting doesn't work for me, when really, the plan was the problem. A good budget actually expects mistakes. It needs a buffer, like a miscellaneous or an oops fund that's designed to absorb the chaos. If you quit the second you overspend, it wasn't your discipline that failed, it was the rigid expectation of perfection.
That distinction is so important. Okay, so failure point number 2 kind of flies in the face of a lot of common advice. The income gap. We are just bombarded with messages to cut small expenses, ditch the latte, you know the drill. But what if that's just a distraction from the real problem?
For a lot of people, it absolutely is. Look, if your fixed costs, your rent, your debt payments, utilities, if those already eat up 85 or 90% of your take-home pay, cutting out $5 lattes isn't the solution. I mean, it saves you, what, $100 a month? It's a moral victory, maybe, but it doesn't solve the structural problem. You still have no breathing room.
So you're not saying don't cut those expenses, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that's the silver bullet that will fix a fundamentally broken income to expense ratio.
Precisely. Budgeting works best when you pair it with an income strategy. If you realize your fixed costs are just too high, the answer isn't to cut your last source of pleasure. The answer is to either cut a major fixed expense or focus your energy on growing your income, even if that growth is slow. Fixing the coffee problem doesn't fix being structurally insolvent.
That gives so much clarity. Okay, the third failure point is purely psychological. Avoidance versus clarity. I think we all know people who just dread looking at their bank account.
Oh, absolutely. They get paid, they spend, and they just cross their fingers and hope there's something left at the end. But that avoidance creates this severe chronic anxiety, that fear of the unknown, the mental math you do before every purchase. It builds up enormous stress.
Yeah.
The sources we looked at argue so strongly that clarity creates calm, even if the numbers are bad.
Right. Even if I look at my account and see I'm over budget, just knowing the exact number is somehow less stressful than imagining the worst case scenario.
It is. Because tracking is about gaining control. You replace that fear with facts. The goal isn't necessarily to feel good immediately, but to create an action plan based on real data. Control, even over a bad situation, is empowering. It reduces that constant worry.
And that leads to the last big failure point, which ties right back to that perfectionism we talked about, rigidity.
We set a budget once, and we expect it to govern our lives forever.
But life is dynamic. It changes.
It has to be dynamic. The budget that worked when you were single at 25 is useless when you're 35 with a mortgage and maybe a family.
The second your life changes in a big way, a new job, a move, anything, that old budget becomes a liability.
It does. A frozen budget is designed to fail because it can't evolve. If you feel like you're constantly forcing your life to fit your budget, you have it completely backward. The budget needs to adapt to your life. And that's why regular reviews are so essential.
Which is a perfect transition into the toolkit section. If those are the 4 things that kill budgets, what are the practical countermeasures? We've pulled 6 actionable rules from this material.
Right, let's move from the problems to the solutions. These 6 rules are simple, but when you apply them consistently, they remove so much of that friction you get with traditional budgeting.
Okay, rule 1 builds right off that first failure point. Budget for real life, not perfect life. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means building in buffer categories. So instead of setting your food budget at exactly $600 when, deep down you sometimes spend $650, just set it at $700.
And that extra 50 isn't wasted.
Not at all. It's your buffer. If you don't spend it, great. It rolls over into savings.
Yeah.
If you do spend it, you haven't failed. You haven't triggered that budget guilt. It reframes the whole goal from spend less to stay within a realistic range.
It turns our human mistakes into just an expected part of the system. That's what makes it sustainable.
Exactly. Sustainability is the real win here.
Okay, rule 2. This is foundational advice, but it's often done badly. Pay yourself first, even if it's small. How do we make sure people actually do it?
Implementation is everything. We're talking about prioritizing savings before you allocate money to anything flexible. And crucially, you have to automate it. The money needs to leave your main account the day your paycheck lands.
So it's not about finding money to save at the end of the month.
When there's nothing left.
Right. It's about treating savings like a bill, like it's rent that you just have to pay.
Yes. And even if small is just $25 a paycheck, the psychological habit of prioritizing your future self is priceless. You protect that capital first, and you force the rest of your budget to live on what's actually left.
Rule 3 helps with that avoidance and overwhelm. Track weekly, not daily. I get why daily tracking would drive you crazy, just watching every little transaction. Why is weekly the sweet spot?
Because daily tracking turns money management into this micromanaging chore. It just increases anxiety and leads to burnout. A weekly check-in, say Sunday night, is enough time to spot a trend and course correct before a small slip becomes a huge problem.
So if I overspent on Thursday, I don't have to feel guilty about it for days, but I still have time to maybe pull back from another category before the month is over. It's control without the obsession.
It respects your time and your sanity. You're the director of your finances, not a full-time auditor.
I like that. Okay, rule 4 is all about clarity. Separate fixed costs from flexible spending. This seems obvious, but why is it so vital?
Because it immediately shows you where your effort will actually make a difference. Fixed costs, your mortgage, your car insurance, those are pretty much set in stone, right? They rarely change. Flexible spending, groceries, entertainment, gas, that's where the active budgeting happens.
So that's where the power is. You realize maybe your fixed costs are too high, and that's a long-term problem to solve, but 80% of your daily effort should be on that flexible bucket.
Precisely. If you're agonizing over a fixed cost that's locked in a contract, you're just wasting energy. Focus your attention on the flexible stuff, where a small change, like meal prepping, can actually move the needle this month. It shows you the high leverage areas.
Rule 5 is the automation powerhouse, tying back to paying yourself first. Automate savings whenever possible. This is all about removing the need for discipline, isn't it?
That's the key. Discipline is a finite resource, but automation is infinite. If you can automate transfers to retirement, to your emergency fund, even your bills, you make the system reliable. You remove the decision fatigue that leads you to spend that money instead.
It's like you're tricking your future self into being responsible. If the money never really hit your main account, you can't spend it.
It makes your whole financial system anti-fragile. It relies on a process, not on how you're feeling on a random Tuesday.
And finally, Rule 6, which is the direct counter to rigidity. Review your budget monthly, not yearly. Why is that cadence so important?
because your life changes way faster than once a year. A yearly review is really only for taxes. A monthly check-in lets you account for seasonality. December is heavy on holidays. August might be expensive with back-to-school stuff. And make sure your budget is always aligned with your current life.
It's the mechanism that keeps the budget alive and evolving with you.
Yes. And that monthly review is the perfect time to check in on Rule 1. How accurate was my real-life buffer? Did I need more? Do I need to adjust my flexible categories from Rule 4? They all work together as a system.
To really bring these rules home, there's that anecdote we found about discipline versus expectation.
Yeah.
It just illustrates this whole shift so perfectly.
Yes, I remember that. It was about someone who had tried everything, zero-based budgets, the envelope system, all of it, and just failed over and over for like 5 years.
And every time they failed, they internalized it. I'm just not good with money. I don't have the discipline. It's such a toxic story to tell yourself.
It really is. And they were setting these impossibly rigid budgets. For instance, they'd budget $200 for dining out, knowing full well they socialized a lot and usually spent closer to $400. They were setting themselves up to fail every single month.
So what changed? How did these flexible rules actually fix that?
The revelation came when they stopped focusing on restriction and started focusing on reality. They rebuilt the budget using Rule 1. They allocated $450 for socializing, the actual historical number, and then adjusted a less important category, like clothing, down to compensate.
So they finally built a budget that acknowledged their actual life. They designed a structure that their reality could survive in.
It changed everything. Suddenly, they weren't breaking the budget by just living their life. They stuck to the plan not because they magically became more disciplined, but because the plan was finally realistic. The problem was never discipline. It was impossible expectations.
That story just proves it. We mistakenly think success comes from being super strict. But flexibility and a few simple, clear rules are so much more powerful than that kind of restriction. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We moved past this old idea of budgeting as just saying no. We focused on intentional direction, on clarity, and designing a system instead of relying on willpower. We looked at those 4 big failure points: unrealistic expectations, the income gap, avoidance, and rigidity.
And we gave you the counter framework, those 6 actionable rules. Budgeting for real life, paying yourself first, tracking weekly, reviewing monthly. It's a clear, manageable way to build a financial system that actually serves you.
And if we boil all this down to one key idea, the sources kept coming back to this final thought that really builds on everything we've talked about. Budgeting isn't really about control.
It's about freedom. Freedom from debt, freedom from that constant low-level financial stress, and the freedom to actually use your money for the things that matter most to you.
So think about which of those 6 rules is the easiest one for you to start with this week. We hope this deep dive helps you start building your own path to that freedom today.